Welcome to Madlik. My name is Geoffrey Stern, and at Madlik we light a spark or shed some light on a Jewish text or tradition. Along with Rabbi Mintz, we host Madlik Disruptive Torah on Clubhouse every Thursday night and share it as the Madlik podcast on your favorite platform. This week's Torah portion is Bahalotcha. We revisit Pesah Sheni, the makeover Passover, which has been adopted by the Orthodox LGBTQ community as a biblical holiday to accept and celebrate different pathways, identities, and evolutions amongst the Jewish people. We review the sources and in the process learn to celebrate Pesach Sheni all over again. So join us for Kosher Queer. Well, welcome. Welcome back to another exciting week of Madlik Disruptive Torah. This week, we're actually revisiting, I don't know, I must have Pesach Sheni on my head because I don't think it's the first. I don't even know if it's only the second. It might even be the third time that we are looking at the makeover Passover. But
it's a great topic, so there's no reason to apologize.
Good. But I can tell you that I read it totally different this year because because around Pesach Sheni, I was particularly interested in it because I had a grandson who was bar mitzvahed between Pesach and Pesach Sheni. And so therefore he was one of the few who actually had the mitzvah of Pesach Sheni. But I was like looking at the sources and all of a sudden something popped up, Rabbi. And it was that the LGBTQ, not general community, the LGBTQ Orthodox community has consecrated, there's no better word for it, Pesach Sheni as their holiday. And we are going to look at the sources that they probably looked at. And I think we are going to read it in a whole new way. And in the process, learn to, I think, understand it better, understand them better, and really to understand a moment in Jewish history, I think, that is happening under our noses that is just so fascinating. So let's go to Numbers 9, where Moses talks about the Israelites' first Passover after they've left Egypt. And then in verse 6, it says, and I'm using our standard translation, which I think is Emrit Fox. It says, but there were some householders, Vayihi Anashim, there were men, people, who were impure by reason of a corpse. In the Hebrew, it just says, he tameim lenefesh. They were impure for a soul, and could not offer the Passover sacrifice on that day. Appearing that same day before Moses and Aaron, those anashim, those householders, said to them, impure though we are by reason of a corpse, why must we be debarred from presenting God's offering at its set time with the rest of the Israelites? Betoch b'nei Yisrael. Moses said to them, stand by. Imdu, and let me hear what instructions God gives about you. And he says, I will ve'eshma ma'atzaveh Hashem lachem. And God spoke to Moses immediately, saying, speak to the Israelite people, saying, when any party, whether you or your posterity in the future, who is defiled by a corpse, or is on a long journey, b'derech rechokah, would offer a Passover sacrifice to God, they shall offer it in the second month. On the 14th day of the month at twilight, they shall eat it with unleavened bread and bitter herbs, and they shall not leave any of it over until the morning. They shall not break a bone of it. They shall offer it in strict accord with the law of the Passover sacrifice. Kechol chukat haPesach Ya'asu Oto. And in the source notes, which are a part of the podcast, you can see everything in context, and it's a full parsha, it's a full a portion of the Torah. But those words that I emphasized in the reading, I had always glossed over. And all of a sudden, they start to take on new meaning. Words like these people, anashim, is all of a sudden strange. The translator has a problem with it. He says householders. Okay?
That's good.
The fact that they wanted to participate with the rest of Bnei Yisrael, and it doesn't necessarily say by way of a corpse, it's tamei nefesh. They were somehow impure. And then for the first time, and we're going to see all of this, Moses' response, Amdu. Well, just stand up there. Just hold it a second. All are going to take on new meaning. So I'm gonna do the Malbim first, and then I'm gonna ask you for some of your thoughts as well. The Malbim says as follows: he focuses on these anashim ha'ema, these people. And he says, that which it is written, these people, is superfluous. And the rabbis explained that this reference, that referenced them in this chapter, which occurred because of them, was because they were special, ksherim, and charedim toward the mitzvot. I think I might have translated this, but it's zechut miyuchad haya al yedei, shehayu anoshim miyuchadim ksherim v'charedim al ha-mitzvot. And because they came to Israel themselves, not through a messenger, because this was destined for them with those words, meaning to say they themselves. And in reference to this, we say that you don't inquire except of the principal, the person who's affected by it, because the honor that he, Moses, asked God and the response that was given in this chapter, it's necessary that the person himself asks, and the honor, the zechut, stays with him. I mean, we clearly know this is a momentous event. You know, we can all talk, as we have, about the revelation at Sinai, when all Israel heard the law. But when people approach Moses, ask a question, and get an answer from God, that's a pretty important moment. And I think the Malbim really, really focuses on it. What are your thoughts, Rabbi?
So I think, the Malbim is worried about a little bit of a different issue. And that is, why should these people be listened to? They come to Moshe and they say, we missed Pesach. So if someone came to you and said, we didn't go to the Seder, we decided to go to Greece instead of going to the Seder. What you would say is, you made a bad decision. You should have gone to the Seder. But Moshe doesn't say that. What Moshe says to them is, you get a second chance. So what the Malbim is concerned about is to say, those were special people. Those were people who were very honest, very authentic, very genuine. And therefore, when they went to Moshe, they weren't just looking because they were lazy the first Pesach or they were negligent the first Pesach. The reason that they said it was because they actually, they were good, authentic people, and they really had a problem, which I think is really beautiful.
So I agree with everything you've said, but again, because I know that Orthodox LGBTQ people have taken this holiday, I read it through a totally different lens. And when it says you had to ask it yourself, you couldn't send a messenger, you couldn't send this through a proxy, it so rings to me about this is a personal issue that affects your mahut, your actual being. And then when it says that they were otherwise special kasherim and charedim to the mitzvot, again, the first time I got exposed to the movement within the LGBTQ Orthodox community, I was explaining it to someone who is gay but not Orthodox, and his first response was, "Why would they be Orthodox?" In other words, he didn't even understand why someone would still be Orthodox in a religion that discounts them so much. And so when you realize what is unique about this, and I'm going to make the argument throughout the evening that this is a unique movement within Judaism, that we can identify few times and far between where within strict orthodoxy you get this kind of pushback, this kind of question to God. But again, the fact, and I'm reading it as they would, where here they are impure, quote unquote, because tonight is going to be different than the night that we did the podcast on Geoffrey Fox.
I was going to say, this is related to the Jeff Fox podcast.
So we did a podcast, Geoffrey Fox, Women Who Love Torah. And Fox makes a really great argument that, in fact, lesbian relationships are not prohibitive. Tonight, we're going on a totally different tangent. We are looking it through the eyes of Orthodox, gay, male Jews predominantly, but all gay and queer Jews who are saying, I want to be Orthodox. It's my religion. It's my Torah. And what I may be doing might not be condoned. I might be Tamei Nefesh. But that doesn't mean that I should be robbed of my Judaism. That's what rings so true about the words that we're reading. So let's go on a little bit forward in some more biblical commentaries. The Midrash Lekach Tov says, again, why were these anashim? These were impure because they came into contact with a corpse, to teach that they were otherwise kesherim, tzadikim, and charedim in the commandments. Again, the whole point is there's a little glitch here, but otherwise these are mamash tzadikim, and I think even, and you'll confirm this or not, that in the rabbinic tradition, it wasn't isolated to tamei met. It wasn't isolated to someone who was impure because of a corpse. It really was related to Tamei Nefesh. And as we'll see in the answer, they expanded it even further. To get to the point that you made about how Moses reacted to the question when he said, stand. So the Midrash Lekach Tov says, this is that teach that the protagonist said we are pure. We didn't know that the impure makes you impure to the Passover. And what did they say? Said Rabbi Hedva in the name of Rabbi Akiva, Moses, that he knew the impure were not allowed to eat the Paschal sacrifices. So what are they talking about? In this reading of it, and this is my translation, we can look at the Hebrew, it's almost as though maybe Moses is a little dismissive. He goes, just stay where you are. Just stand there. And there's a play between three words, standing, hearing, and commanding. And he says, it's like a man who says that I heard from my rabbi, how lucky are you born of women who are guaranteed that all the time they can talk to God. Who do you think you are coming up with this question? There's a little bit of a dialectic here between Moses kind of putting them in their place, asking God and seeing what he's going to adjudicate. And I think that maybe the response was a little bit of a surprise. I mean, you were touching upon those issues. What is your read?
So you're raising a lot of different things. I mean, so your question is really, what did they expect? So let's imagine, let's imagine the scene. Let's imagine the choreography of the whole thing. They come to Moshe and as really good people, this is your point that you made, really good people, to say that we're good people and we want a chance too. We're tamei, but we want a chance too. And what do they think that Moshe is going to respond? Do they think that they're going to get what they want from Moshe? It's right. It's hard to tell from the text, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And I think your point, I think the point that you made is a point that the Malbim is sensitive to, whether the Malbim, gives, or obviously the Malbim doesn't give the answer to LGBTQ, but the Malbim is sensitive to the point that these communities have picked up on. And that is that the phrase Ha'anashim Ha'hema is a superfluous phrase. It's not necessary. It could have said Vayomru Elav, and they said to Moshe. Throughout the Torah, it always says, and they said to Moshe. But here they don't say it that way. Here they say, Vayomru ha'anashim ha'hema. And I think that's really the key. And the Malbim and the Medrash pick up on it. That is the key point in the whole thing, that these people are, even though they look like they did something wrong, but actually they're good people. They're good religious people. That's a very important point. And that's obviously the point that everybody jumps on.
So again, I'm not in any way saying that any of these original sources saw it through the same lens that we're looking through it tonight. But again, we're looking through it tonight through the lens of this LGBTQ community that has adopted it, and it just makes it at a whole new level. So let's talk about how they were impure. It says, "Anachnu tameim lenefesh." Seeing that the ritual impurity we have incurred was incurred in the process of our fulfilling a positive commandment, writes the Seforno, why should the result of this be the misdemeanor of not fulfilling such an important commandment? So these Orthodox queer folk are saying, we want to build a family. We want to have long-term relationships. We want to be part of the community. We go to Minyan 3 times a day. We are Tamei Nefesh. We are being pushed away because of who we are and what we're trying to do. It just really makes the words seem so, and it seems, there are many times that a holiday is hijacked or a ritual is modified for a new term. As I read through these sources, knowing how this community had taken, it really opened it up in a whole new way. It was just fascinating. I mean, even to the point where there's an extra hey in the word of ve'esma mayitzava Hashem lachem, and you should hear what God will tell you. And it says again, playing on this sense that Moses was really pushing back a little bit, diminishing them. In the Emek Dava, it says, to diminish the subject, he added the female hey at the end of it. I mean,
that's interesting. That's great, right?
It brings gender into it. So it's right. Really, then we get to B'derech L'choka. So they were impure, but God comes back, and God comes back with a law that is much far-reaching. He says it's for the generations. And he also says it includes people who are on a journey far off. The Chizkuni says there is a dot on the letter Hey of the word L'choka. This dot is not connected to the word B'derech. If so, the word would be treated as if it had appeared. Rather, the dot connects to the word ish, a man or person. We'll understand the person concerned as being spiritually on a journey that had estranged him to Judaism and its a God. Elakai ish koloma im rachoku. Wow. I mean, that is touchy-feely. Any way you want to look at it.
That's great. You'll love it, right?
Yeah. It's really, really amazing that this became the holiday. I mean, I've always loved it because I think it talks about second chances. What I think we're talking here is not necessarily a second chance, but possibly also an alternative chance, an alternative
So that little
opportunity.
switch that you said is very interesting, because that's not explicit in the text, but I think you're right. You see, second chances don't work. That's not the point they're trying to make. They're not making a point about second chances. They're making a point about alternative chances, that there have to be different ways to observe things. Right? I mean, that's a pretty major point, because that's not the way we're generally brought up. So that's really an interesting point.
Yep. So we've discussed being far away as being geographically, spatially far away. We've talked about it being spiritually far away, but the Chizkuni isn't finished. He says, or someone of your generations, O Ladoa Techem. The verse means that the person described is either at this time far from you spiritually or time-wise. In other words, if many years from now, there will be someone who, due to the time that elapsed, since the Exodus feels disconnected to our history and therefore would not observe the Passover ritual by having his heart in it. I could only go wow, wow, wow all over again.
I think you're 100% right. Wow, wow, wow is 100% right. I mean, it's amazing, right?
It really is how, in a sense, this is organic to this very strange law that somehow I have always been so fascinated with.
Now, you didn't say, we should have probably started this way to say the obvious. This is the only law in the Torah which has this backup plan. Right, that's an important thing. It's not as if there's a selection of these things and they chose this one. This is the only one in the entire Torah where you have this. So that also is interesting.
So I don't normally quote the Lubavitcher Rebbe.
Likutei
Sichot, yeah. But he asks exactly that question. He says, since the work of the first Pesach is to stir away from evil, you have to put away the chametz. We have the obligation to burn the chametz. The symbol of evil is the leaven in the dough. So we don't have any chametz in our possession. It's not the case in the second Pesach, whose point is transform evil in good. We don't need on this occasion to burn the chametz in our possession because thanks to Pesach Sheni, we have the opportunity to convert chametz in holiness. Now, what I really wanted to quote was another opinion that asked, why don't we have a Sukkot Sheni? And why
right, well, that's what I was going to ask.
And why,
or a Yom Kippur, say better, or a Yom Kippur Sheni.
But one of the commentaries goes back to the argument they make. And the argument that they make that I try to emphasize is, why must we be debarred from presenting God's offering at its time set with the rest of the Israelis? Betoch b'nei Yisrael. Passover is the holiday that we became a nation. The idea is that on Pesach, which is when you're either in or you're out, these people are coming and saying, why should we be left out? I don't mind being out of the sukkah. I don't mind not coming to services on Yom Kippur. But in the seminal moment that the Jewish people became a nation, I cannot be left out. I am part of the nation. So again, it gets back to this concept of we are anashim, we are part of this. We have to argue for ourselves. And then you get what the Lubavitcher Rebbe, the Chabad Rebbe said, which is that on Pesach, you have a different sense than on Pesach Sheni. On Pesach, you have to get rid of all of the chametz because you're a sense, you are sur meira. You are pushing away bad in order to get to good. And he kind of makes the argument that when you do Pesach Sheni, you're allowed to have chametz in your house because you are aseh tov. You are embracing the good. You are taking people who have been left out and who are embracing the good. It's an amazing message, but before I get your comment, I want to explain why I am quoting the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Because I think that this phenomenon that we are experiencing today, which is a major potential for change within Judaism, that it's coming from Orthodox Jews, happens rarely. And I look almost at the Hasidic movement, where the Baal Shem Tov looked at a decimated people of Israel who felt left out. They were not learned. They couldn't give the time and effort that they thought was necessarily to be a good Jew. They thought they were bad Jews. Correct me if I'm wrong. Maybe I'm reading the Buberian or the
No, you're right.
stylized
So far, so
version.
good.
And he
So far,
gave
so
them
good.
back their Judaism. And if you look at every story of the Baal Shem Tov, it's about, he asked, who's my cellmate going to be in Gan Eden when I go up to heaven? And they showed him this 400-pound glutton that all he was doing was eating. And they explained that that's all he did because he did it for a pure reason. I won't get into it. Or the little boy who couldn't say the Aleph, who couldn't read Hebrew. All of their stories are about these anashim who feel left out. And it was a movement that came from within Orthodoxy. And what really affected me as I read these texts, and as I read, and we will read how they take these texts, this is a movement within Orthodoxy. These are Shomer Shabbat, Shomer Mitzvot people that are saying we deserve a place as well. And that's what makes it so not only heart-wrenching, but from an intellectual point of view, from a Jewish historical point of view, so absolutely fascinating. I think we're viewing history.
I think that's right. I mean, and actually, that's exactly the point that the Malbim made. That you started with the Malbim, and now you come full circle right back to the Malbim. That the most important thing to know is this is within the community. This is not a challenge to the community, but this is from within the community. And that makes it honest and that makes it legitimate. Now whether, that's an interesting question, because why that should be. Maybe even if you challenge the community, you should be legitimate. But that's not the point here. The point is that these groups feel that they're within the community. And that's what the whole thing is. They deserve a chance. They deserve an alternative because they are from within the community.
And in terms of, I sensed a little bit, Rabbi, when we dedicated a session to what you're doing in terms of conversion. And correct me if I'm wrong, but the original people that you were involved with were from the Orthodox community. You gave an intro and you said, now there are Orthodox people that are in every facet of life. It's an open community. And as a result, nature happens. And all of a sudden, there'll be a romance with a non-Jew. And that's kind of what introduced you or brought you into or gave you such a critical spot within Orthodoxy. But again, these things are happening and they're fascinating because you, of all people, will say what conversion has become for you. It's bigger than just solving the problem of a modern Orthodox family whose child meets a non-Jewish woman in college.
I mean, that is really very interesting. And that's also, we want to do it within the tradition. Right? We want to be part of the tradition. We don't want to be outsiders. We don't want to be intermarried. We don't want to be not accepted. The whole thing about conversion is to allow people to be accepted. And there was an interesting survey. I quoted it in the Hampton Synagogue, and that is that 59% of Orthodox families said that they would not want their child to marry a convert to Judaism. Now, that's too bad, because that means that they haven't been successful yet. Exactly what the Malbim pointed out, that, we haven't been successful yet in conversion, in integrating them within the community. People still feel them as outsiders, and that's bad.
So I'm going to close by reading a little bit extent from someone we know, Rabbi Kenneth Brander, the Rosh Hashiva, the head of Or Torah, the school system that Rabbi Riskin created in Efrat. And he wrote a tshuva that you could compare to Geoffrey Fox's tshuva. But Geoffrey Fox's tshuva focused on lesbian relationship, and he tried to argue radically that it's okay. You can make a case that it's okay within Jewish law. And the fascinating part of the discussion that we've been having tonight, and where the LGBTQ Orthodox community is taking it, is they're not saying we can change that rule. Just like the peasant under Baal Shem Tov couldn't say it's okay to be an Am Ha'aretz. But what they were saying was that we want a place, and I will argue that not only that, and maybe Brander doesn't go this far, is that although he does, we'll see in a second, he quotes, it gives us a new insight. It takes us to a new height, just like the Hasidic movement might have been based on redeeming those who were left out as a Pesach Sheni. It gave Judaism a reboot. So here's what he writes. He wrote a book. It's actually a tshuva, an article. It's going to be published in Hebrew. It's called Finding a Home in Our Midst. And I've taken a few excerpts here. And he writes, we have created a suffocating environment that not only prevents gay and lesbian Orthodox Jews from experiencing spiritual fullness, but also one that fosters low self-esteem, loneliness, and fear, pushing some to depression, self-harm, and most tragically, death by suicide. Indeed, various studies have pointed to the connection between unsupportive religious communities and rates of depression, self-harm, and death by suicide among LGBTQ youth. The time has come for us to look for halachically appropriate ways to confront the mental anguish, pain of discrimination, and disenfranchisement that gay and lesbian members of our community face. Our starting point as Orthodox Jews is clear. Sexual relations between people of the same sex is forbidden. So this makes it fascinating. He's not whitewashing. He's not pinkwashing. He is saying this is what the law is, and it seems that most people in the movement, and by the way, there are at least 5 or 10 different movements, organizations in Israel and here that are created by and catering to Orthodox, and I can only emphasize that enough, Orthodox queer people. He quotes Erez Harari further shows that unlike straight people for whom religious correlates with positive mental health outcomes, gay Orthodox Jews' religiosity correlates with negative mental health outcomes. So he makes arguments about we accept Mechalelei Shabbat, we accept all such people. He even explains, and I never knew this, that the original Hashkama minyan, the early minyan on Saturday morning, was
for people who were going to work.
Who was going to works. But one of the things that he says is he quotes Rabbi Lichtenstein, Rabbi Soloveitchik's son-in-law, who said that actually we can learn so much from these people. It almost takes you back again to those Hasidic stories where the Baal Shem Tov says, I never understood this until I met this sinning person, who enlightened me by his purity, enlightened me by the tenacity, by the dedication. I really feel it becomes such a fascinating bookend to what Geoffrey Fox does, and what our knee-jerk reaction, mine especially, would be to bring commentaries to explain that there's only one verse in the Torah that says this is wrong, and it only has to do with this type of relationship. They're not going there. They want to be accepted as Tamei Nefesh. And I think it's just such it elevates Pesach Sheni to a whole other level. It elevates our Parsha to a whole other level. It makes you think about what starting a family is, what dedication to mitzvot is. I'm just blown away. I can't stop focusing on it.
It's amazing. I mean, you're 100% right. And it's really, Rabbi Brander is dealing with something different than Rabbi Fox is dealing with. But the idea is that they want to be included. Rabbi Brander actually is more in line with the Pesach Sheni argument. We want to be included. We want to be included within the community. We're members of the community. We want to be included in the community. So I don't know. I don't think Rabbi Brander, if I remember correctly from reading, it's a long tshuva, I don't think Rabbi Brander brings the example of Pesach Sheni, but we can write him an email to say that would be a perfect example.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, this has been an absolute delight.
This is really interesting today. Ashikoach to Geoffrey. Thank you, everybody, for participating. You should all have a Shabbat Shalom, and it gives you a new perspective on how to look at the Parsha. And we look forward to seeing you next week for Parshat Shlach. Be well, everybody. Shabbat shalom.
Lauren, how are you today?
I'm wonderful, thank you. Do you think that in the gay community they will accept the Pesach Sheni position, or do you think is there a way to get this to enable them to practice to practice Passover at the time that Passover is practiced by everybody? Because there is obviously this whole Pesach Sheni discussion that's in the literature. Can we get from point A to point B?
Yeah, I think it's a great question and observation. I think that the text that I quoted, and again, I was looking through it for their eyes, was saying how the focus was that these people who couldn't, who were kept out of the Pesach Rishon, the first Pesach, were otherwise kasherim, tzaddikim, charedim. I mean, you couldn't pick more lofty designations for who these people were who needed to celebrate it in an alternative fashion. And I think, again, if this holiday had been imposed upon the queer community, I think your question would have much, much more merit. I think they have embraced this holiday because they feel they're different. They feel, but they also feel that they are entitled. And I think the basis of your question would be, are they entitled then to all of the rituals, traditions, laws, and customs of Judaism? And I would say, and I can't put words in their mouths, that the answer is yes, but Pesach Sheni has special meaning to them. And it's funny that Pesach Sheni, before the LGBTQ community took it upon, was only Hasidim were doing it. And again, I think there's an amazing direct line, not between the Hasidim that you see in Mea Shearim today, who are creating all sorts of problems, but the Hasidic movement started by the Baal Shem Tov, which was a revolutionary movement. You could even, lahavdil, make the connection to Jesus, where he was taking, send me the outcast, the lowly. You know, there's a verse in Psalms that says, Evan shema'asu habanim hayita l'rosh pina. The stone that was thrown out, that was rejected by the builder, became the cornerstone. And I think that is always been the sign of the Messiah. That's always been the sign of God's chosen. David was that rejected son. And I think this is part of a different tradition, that the Pesach Sheni, as the Lubavitcher Rebbe said, on Pesach, you've got to get rid of the chametz. Here, you overcome the chametz with good. You can. It's an amazing choice, I think, that they've chosen. It's been 10 years now, and again, I can't but emphasize that it's Orthodox gay Jews that are doing this, and they have found what they want, I think, and it's up to them to decide whether they want to give up Pesach Sheni for Pesach Rishon, for the straight and narrow, and but I think my read on this, and my read on their acceptance of the fact that they are tamei nefesh, that they are quote unquote impure of soul, is a strength, not a deficiency. And that's, I think, the message that they're taking from these people that went to Moses and got a direct answer from God. So anyway, I just think there are plenty of ideas. The fact that you asked your question, I think that's part of their fight, their contest with traditional Judaism. That they're, in a sense, maybe you could call Pesach Sheni, version 2.0. Judaism. and then you don't say, I want to go back to 1.0, right? I mean, that makes it a little bit different way of characterizing it. Shabbat Shalom. And I can only say, please, if you're listening to this as a podcast, click on the link link to the Sephirah notes. There are a lot of amazing sources there. Many times we talk about changes in halacha that occurred many thousands of years ago. This is something that is occurring under our noses, and it obviously has an effect and in direct human connection to gender identity and all of those good things. But there's a bigger story here. There's a bigger story about how Judaism is changing from within, and I think these gender issues are going to take Judaism to a whole new level.